You are already somewhere quieter than where you started. Whatever the day carried, the weight of it, the noise of it, the many small demands it placed on your hands and your mind, you can feel it beginning to loosen now. You don't need to hold any of it. Not tonight. Find a comfortable position. Let your shoulders drop if they've been raised. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands rest open or curled gently, however they want to settle. There is nowhere to be but here. There's nothing required of you but this: to breathe slowly, to let your eyes close if they haven't already, and to follow a voice into a place where the evening is long and unhurried, and the air smells faintly of warm wax and dry desert flowers. Take one slow breath in and let it go all the way out until your chest is easy and light. Take another, and one more. Good. The world you are about to enter moves at the pace of beeswax cooling. Nothing is urgent there. Nothing demands your attention before you're ready to give it. The evenings are long and amber lit, and the tasks that fill them are quiet and patient and never quite finished, which means there's always something soft and gentle to do, and never any reason to hurry. Let yourself go toward it now. Let the sounds around you begin to recede. Whatever hum of machinery, whatever distant murmur, whatever small creak or whisper exists in the room where your body is resting, let it all gradually soften, like the last of the daylight going out of an evening sky. You are going somewhere else now, somewhere warm in the amber parts and cool in the open air, somewhere that smells of honey and chamomile and the mineral sharpness of clean desert stone. Let yourself arrive there slowly. There is no rush. There is only the dusk and the dunes and the low golden light of a place that has been waiting for you with great patience. Come in. The first thing you notice is the light. It is the particular amber of late dusk, not golden exactly, not orange exactly, but something between the two, something that has been filtered through a long afternoon and arrived here on the other side of it, softened and warm, and without any sharp edges left in it at all. It comes in low across the dunes, which are vast and close all at once. They ring this small settlement on three sides, rising and dipping in long, unhurried ridges, their crests catching the last of the sun's warmth, so that the sand there glows the color of old copper. Not brightly, not with any urgency, just glowing, the way an ember glows when you've stopped tending the fire, and it's settling into itself, content, banked, and steady. You are standing just inside a low wall. The wall is made of pale stone and packed earth, and it rises only to about your chest, low enough to see over, high enough to feel held by, high enough to break whatever wind might come down from the open dune field beyond. It is old. You can tell by the way the mortar has softened at the edges, by the slight lean and sway of it over its long run, by the patches of color where someone has pressed small pieces of clay tile into gaps, ochre and rust and a faded clay blue. Not to be decorative exactly, but because the gaps needed filling, and these were the pieces at hand, and something that is mended can still be beautiful. Inside the wall, the ground is swept sand, pale where it has been disturbed by footsteps, slightly deeper in color in the places where no one has walked in a while. There is the faint grit of it underfoot, fine as flour in some places, slightly coarser where a dune has sifted something heavier in over the wall, and it gives a very quiet sound beneath your steps, the softest possible whisper of sand on stone, where flat pavers have been set into the ground in an irregular path. The hive boxes stand in 2 long rows. There are perhaps a dozen of them, maybe a few more. It's difficult to count in this light, and the light itself discourages counting, discourages the precise tallying of things. They are made of pale wood that has been worn smooth by seasons of wind and handled regularly by careful hands. And they sit on low stone platforms so that the sand doesn't reach their lower edges. Each box is wrapped, loosely but thoroughly, in panels of quilted linen, pale, unbleached, slightly golden in the amber light. And these panels shift very faintly in the air that moves through the yard, a quiet creak and settle of fabric, like the sound of a ship at rest in still water, all slow adjustment and no urgency. The quilted linen is thick, stitched in long, even rows by someone who takes their time, who finds in the rhythm of stitching a kind of steady companionship. Some panels are newer, their linen still stiff and bright. Some are older, soft with handling, the stitching irregular, in a way that means it has been repaired many times in many small places. All of them are useful. All of them are, in their patched and continuing way, whole. From the hive boxes comes the hum. It is low, lower than you expected, lower than the sound a single bee makes, lower even than the sound of many bees. It is the sound of a community at rest, a collective breath in and out, a resonance that comes up through the stone platforms the boxes rest on and through the packed sand of the yard. And, if you stand very still, through the soles of your feet. It is not loud. It is barely even a sound, if you think about it. More like a quality of the air, a mild and steady vibration that the air carries the way it carries warmth, invisibly, as a condition of being present in this place. And there is the smell. It arrives before anything else, really. Before the light fully registers, before your eyes have adjusted and taken in the full shape of the yard. The smell is already there, already settled into you. It is warm wax first, the deep, slightly sweet, slightly woody smell of beeswax, not the sharp, honeyed brightness of fresh comb, but something older and more patient. The smell of wax that has been worked and melted and poured and cooled and worked again over many seasons. Wax that has absorbed the smell of the hive and the hive's surroundings and the hands of the person who tends them. Beneath that, dry chamomile, not the bright green smell of fresh herbs, but the dusty, papery, faintly sweet smell of dried chamomile that has been bundled and hung and has given up most of its brightness to time, retaining only this quiet herbal undertone, a suggestion of something floral and peaceful at the bottom of everything. And beneath even that, faint and clean, the mineral sharpness of desert stone and desert air, the smell of rock that has been heated all day and is beginning to release its warmth, a smell that is hard to name but very easy to recognize, the smell of dry and open places, of air that has traveled far across a landscape that holds very little water. The temperature is beginning to change. It is early evening. The sun has just touched the highest ridge of the western dunes, which means the air is still warm close to the ground where the sand holds its heat, but already cooling above, already carrying that faint, clean sharpness that the desert sends down when the sky begins to darken. You can feel it moving gently through the yard. Not a wind, not even quite a breeze, but a slow circulation of air, warm from below, cool from above, settling around you like a comfortable and unhurried conversation between the day and the night. the center of the yard, between the 2 rows of hive boxes, there's a low workbench. It is made of the same pale wood as the hive boxes, worn smooth by long use, its surface slightly gritty with the fine sand that sifts in from the dunes and lands on every horizontal surface in this yard, on the bench, on the stone platforms, on the tops of the hive boxes, on the flat heads of the clay tiles set into the wall. The sand is too fine to sweep away entirely and too constant to bother with, so it has simply become part of the texture of the place. A faint, soft grit that is always there beneath your fingertips, that gives every surface a slight warmth, that reminds you quietly and continuously that you are in the middle of a landscape that is very old and very patient. On the bench, there are tools: a bone-handled knife for uncapping comb, a small brass hook for lifting frames, a roll of thick linen thread the color of cream, a blunt-tipped needle as long as your middle finger resting in a shallow clay dish. There are also small clay molds, a handful of them, arranged in a loose grouping at one end of the bench, round and oval, some with simple impressions in their bases, the shape of a leaf or a cell, or simply a smooth dimple, the kind of mold that makes a candle that will sit flat on any surface and burn without fuss for a long and quiet evening. And there are the candles already made, small beeswax candles, each one the warm amber ivory color of old honey, each one placed in a rough clay dish and set at intervals along the low wall and at the corners of the stone platforms and on the flat pavers between the rows of hive boxes. Most of them are lit. Their flames are small and steady. There's not enough air moving through the yard to trouble them, just enough to occasionally make them shiver very slightly and then recover. Each one a quiet, small brightness in the gathering dusk, each one adding its own thread of warm beeswax smell to the air. The whole yard smells of them now, of warm wax and chamomile and clean desert air, of linen and old honey and the mineral patience of heated stone. You stand still for a moment and breathe it in. There is no hurry. The dunes are copper and the candles are lit and the hives are humming their slow, deep hum, and the evening has only just begun. She moves from the far end of the yard, the Patchwright, emerging from behind the last hive box in the row, with the slow and deliberate ease of someone who knows exactly where she is in the dark, who does not need to look down to know where the pavers are or where the stone platforms end, who has walked this yard in every season and every light and has made a quiet map of it in her body. She is unhurried. That is the first and clearest thing about her. There is no sense of task or deadline in the way she moves, no urgency pressing at her edges. She carries in one hand a small wooden tray, and in the other a brass lantern, its flame the same amber as the candles along the wall, its light moving gently with her steps and casting a soft oval of gold across the sand ahead of her. She sets the tray on the workbench without a sound, carefully, with the attention of someone who has set things down many thousands of times and understands that the moment of setting down is itself a kind of completion, a small placing of one thing into its right relationship with another thing. The tray holds a short roll of linen thread, a cup of water in which several dried chamomile flowers are slowly opening, and a fold of wax paper still carrying the faint waffle texture of the cloth it was pressed against while cooling. She does not look at you in any expectant way. She simply continues, the way someone continues when they are in the middle of an evening that has its own long shape, its own patient sequence of small tasks. But there is a quality to the space around her, a quality of welcome, of room made, that makes it clear you may stay as long as you like, that your presence is neither an intrusion nor a demand, that you are simply here in the amber yard, in the cooling evening, and that is enough. She turns toward the first hive box in the nearer row. She places the lantern on the stone platform beside it and takes a moment, just a moment, with both hands resting lightly on the front face of the box, not doing anything, just feeling. The hum comes up through her palms, and she listens to it the way you might listen to someone breathing beside you in a quiet room, not analyzing, not measuring, just receiving the information that comes in warmth and vibration and the steady, even resonance of a community at rest. Then she moves to the quilted linen panel that wraps the box's south-facing side. She runs her fingers along the lower hem of it, slowly, from one corner to the other, a motion so practiced it has become like breathing, something that happens without requiring conscious thought. And she finds, near the middle, a small place where a seam has opened, where two panels of linen have separated by perhaps the length of a finger, leaving a gap through which the cold night air could eventually begin to work. She does not hurry to fix it. She touches the gap with her thumb and considers it for a moment, the way you might consider a sentence that needs one word changed. Just sitting with it, understanding it, before reaching for anything. From the pocket of her vest, she takes the blunt-tipped needle, already threaded with cream-colored linen thread. She threads her needles at the beginning of the evening, one for each likely repair, because threading a needle in candlelight is work, and she prefers to do her work in sequence rather than interruption. She pinches the two edges of the seam together between thumb and forefinger and begins to sew. The sound of it is almost nothing, just the faint drag of thread through linen, that slight resistance, the almost inaudible whisper of fabric against fabric as the seam closes. There is a rhythm to it, a very slow and regular rhythm. Pull, pause, the muted pressure of the stitch setting, then the arc of the needle back through, pull, pause, and it falls into pace with the hum of the hive behind the panel. And after a few stitches, you can no longer tell which of these rhythms you are following, the needle or the hum, the quiet sewing or the quiet breathing of 10,000 sleeping bees. She works without rushing. She makes her stitches slightly larger than strictly necessary, because these are stitches for warmth and not for appearances, and a seam that breathes is a seam that lasts. When the gap is closed, she draws the thread through twice more for good measure, then cuts it with a small folding knife she wears at her belt, and presses the seam flat with her thumb, running it along the full length of the repair, as if to confirm the wholeness of it, to say, yes, this holds, this is enough, this will carry warmth through tonight, and many nights after. She steps back and lets the panel hang as it wants to. The linen shifts once in the moving air, a quiet creak and settle, and then stills. She lifts the lantern and moves to the next box. The dunes beyond the wall are going darker now, the copper color deepening as the sun drops fully below the western ridge. The sky above them is a deep amber blue, the kind of blue that is not quite blue yet, that still holds warmth in it, that is transitioning without hurry from one thing to the next, the way all of this evening transitions, by gradual degrees, by patient drift, without announcement. The first stars are not yet visible. The last of the direct sunlight has gone, but the dunes still hold it. The sand still glows from within, a dull copper warmth that makes the yard feel lit from below as well as above. A double warmth, held and ambient, not going anywhere quickly. At the second hive box, the Patchwright lifts the outer cover to check the weight of the uppermost frame. This is a different motion. She hooks her fingers under the edge of the cover with a particular care, lifts with her legs and not her back, and tilts the cover aside in one slow arc that produces a quiet sound. A low wooden note, not quite a creak and not quite a knock. The sound of one piece of wood separating from another piece of wood that it has been resting against long enough to develop a slight adhesion, a mild reluctance to part. She sets it down on the stone platform beside the box. A muted thud, absorbed by the stone, going nowhere, and leans forward slightly over the open top of the hive. The warmth of the hive rises to meet her face. It is the warmth of the cluster, of thousands of small, warm bodies in close and patient association, maintaining a temperature that has nothing to do with the cooling air outside, maintaining it not by fire, but by the collective warmth of their own being, by the slow wing fanning of the innermost bees who keep the center of the cluster at the temperature that wax and brood and colony require. It smells, from here, of fresh comb and the very slight sweetness of uncapped honey, and beneath that, something deeper, something warmer and more complex. The smell of the hive itself, not the wax smell of the outside world, but the living smell of the inside world, which is richer and older and harder to name. She does not disturb them. She simply hovers the lantern over the open top for a moment, gauging the depth and fullness of the frames she can see, then replaces the cover with the same care she removed it. Slow, controlled, settled into place with that same muted wooden thud, which this time sounds like a door being gently closed, like a last good night being spoken in a language that doesn't need words. She runs her palm once over the top of the cover. Then she moves on. You follow at a little distance, not crowding her, not hurrying to keep pace, just drifting behind her in the amber candlelight as she works her way down the row, pausing at each box, touching each quilted panel, running her careful fingers along each seam and edge. At the third box, she finds a panel that has come loose at one corner. The small bone ring that ties it to the frame has worked open, and the corner of the panel hangs free, lifting slightly in the air that moves through the yard. She refastens it with a twist of wire from a small coil she carries on the tray, working with the patient efficiency of someone who has done this action so many times that it requires no thought, just the quiet attention of the hands. At the fourth box, no repair is needed. She simply rests her hands on the panel for a moment, feeling the hum, then lifts the brass lantern and carries it with her to the fifth. The candles along the wall have settled into their steady, small flames. The beeswax smell has deepened with the evening, grown more present as the temperature drops and the air becomes still. Warm smells carry differently in still air. They pool and layer. They build slowly into something you stop noticing consciously and simply inhabit, the way you inhabit a temperature or a light. The chamomile undercurrent has deepened too, become more papery, more like dried herbs hanging in a cool room than like any living plant, comforting in exactly the way old things are comforting, in exactly the way things that have been tended for a long time have a particular depth of character. Beyond the wall, from somewhere deeper in the dune field, there comes a sound. It is very faint, almost inaudible over the low, resonant hum of the hives. But it is there, the sound of sand sliding, of a small mass of sand releasing from the crest of a dune and flowing down the lee face in a long, quiet cascade. A sound like the softest possible rain on the softest possible surface. A sound that lasts perhaps 5 seconds and then is finished, absorbed into the silence that was already there. The dunes settle. The candles continue to burn. The Patchwright works her way to the end of the first row and then turns, unhurried, toward the second. She has found 2 more small repairs, 1 seam, 1 loose cord, and made them both with the same patient attention, the same slight resistance of thread through linen, the same pressing of the thumb along the closed seam to confirm its wholeness. Each repair takes perhaps 5 minutes. Each one is its own small completion, its own quiet saying of, "This is enough. This is whole. This will hold." And when it is done, she moves on, and the hive box returns to its own patient hum, and the quilted linen panel settles back into its gentle creaking, and the candles burn, and the night deepens. The second row of hive boxes faces slightly east, which means that when the moon rises, not yet, but eventually, in its own time, it will light these panels from the front, and they will glow a warm, unbleached ivory in the moonlight, like paper held near a flame. For now, it is the candlelight that touches them, the small, distributed warmth of a dozen beeswax flames moving gently along the wall, and the lantern the Patchwright carries, and the last copper-deep warmth of the dunes. She pauses at the 6th box in the second row, the largest one in the yard, wider than the others, with 2 deep boxes stacked beneath the honey super, and she stands before it for a longer moment than usual. Not concerned, not alarmed, simply attending, listening to the quality of the hum, which is perhaps marginally lower in frequency here, marginally more resonant, the hum of a larger and older community, a colony that has been in this box for many seasons and has made it entirely their own. She nods, once, very slightly, to herself. Then she opens the small notebook she keeps in her vest pocket, a narrow thing, the pages soft and slightly waxy from proximity to beeswax, the cover a warm brown leather worn thin at the corners, and she makes a small mark in it with a stub of pencil, a mark that means something particular in the notation she has developed over years, and that no one else needs to understand. She closes the notebook and slides it back into her pocket and moves on. The air coming over the wall now is noticeably cooler than it was at the top of the evening. The day's warmth is lifting off the dunes and being replaced by the night air that the desert sends down, clean and dry, and carrying that mineral sharpness, the smell of stone and emptiness, and great open distances under a darkening sky. It is not cold, not yet. There is still warmth held in the sand underfoot, warmth radiating from the stone platforms and the pale stone wall. But you can feel the direction the temperature is traveling, the slow and patient gradient from the warmth of day to the cool of full night, and it makes the candlelight feel more important, makes the hum of the hives feel more precious, makes the quilted linen panels on the boxes seem very wise and very necessary. She finishes the second row. She stands at the far end of the yard, at the corner, where the wall meets a slightly higher section of packed earth and stone that forms a windbreak for the smallest and youngest of the hives. 4 new boxes, their wood a warmer gold than the weathered older boxes, their quilted panels newer and stiffer, and not yet fully softened by weather and season. These boxes hum more quietly than the others, their community smaller and less established, their note higher and more tentative. The Patchwright checks each one with particular care. Fingers along every seam, a pause at each quilted face, a small adjustment of the cord at the top of one panel where it has worked slightly loose. She is gentle with these, gentler even than with the others, the way she might be gentle with something that has not yet learned its full strength, that is still becoming what it is, that deserves patience above all else. When she is done with the young hives, she carries the lantern back to the center of the yard and sets it on the workbench. She stands for a moment, with her hands resting on the bench surface, feeling the fine sand grit under her palms, letting her eyes move slowly around the yard. The 2 rows of hive boxes, the candles along the wall, the deep copper glow of the dunes visible just above the wall's coping, the first suggestion of a star appearing in the high dark blue overhead. She breathes in. The beeswax and chamomile and mineral air come in with the breath. She breathes out, and she reaches for the roll of wax paper on the tray. The workbench is the center of the yard, the way a hearth is the center of a room. Not because it is the brightest thing, though the lantern resting on it makes it reasonably bright, but because everything else in the yard is arranged in relation to it, because it is the place where making happens, where the various small tasks of the evening collect and proceed and are completed and set aside. She unrolls a length of wax paper onto the bench surface. The paper makes a very soft crackling sound as it unrolls. Not sharp, not startling, just the faint voice of wax-stiffened paper relaxing from its roll. A papery whisper that is entirely in keeping with the other quiet sounds of the yard. She runs her palm across it to flatten it, then weights the near edge with a small, smooth river stone that has lived on this bench for as long as the bench has been here. Pale gray, slightly oval, worn smooth by water in some river that was very far from here and very long ago. From a flat wicker basket on the shelf beneath the bench, she takes several bundles of dried herbs. There is chamomile, unmistakably, the dry, papery flower heads giving up their gentle, dusty sweetness the moment they are moved, filling the air around the bench with a deeper and more present version of the undercurrent that has been in the yard all evening. There's also something else, a low, flat bundle of a gray-green herb she keeps in the coolest part of the basket, whose smell is quieter and more resinous, more mineral, something between sage and something that has no exact name, the smell of a plant that grows in rocky, dry places and stores its fragrance carefully because it can afford to spend very little. She lays the herb bundles on the wax paper in a row, the chamomile first, arranged loosely so the flower heads aren't crushed, then the gray-green herb bundle beside it, and covers them with a second sheet of wax paper, which she unrolls with the same soft, crackling deliberateness and waits at the far edge with another stone. this one smaller and darker. A piece of basalt worn to a smooth, dark disc. Then she takes the folded section of already pressed wax paper from the tray, the one she brought out at the beginning of the evening, and opens it carefully to see how the previous pressing has settled. The herbs inside are flat and dry and perfect. The flower heads of the chamomile still round and complete, though pressed thin. The gray-green herb in long, flat sprays, like something drawn in pencil. She holds it near the lantern for a moment, tilting it slightly. An old habit, a checking of work in good light, and then folds it again along its original crease and sets it in the flat basket beside the new pressing. There's a stack of these folded sheets in the basket, a dozen or more, each one holding pressed herbs in various states of readiness. Some will be opened and the herbs removed, wrapped in small parcels of light cloth and tucked between the linen panels of the hive wraps. Not for the bees, exactly, though the bees have their own complicated relationships with scent, but as part of the long, slow maintenance of the whole system, the constant small insistence that the place where work is done should also be a place that is pleasant, that function and comfort are not in opposition to each other. She works with the wax paper and the herbs for a while. There's not much to say about it, and that is exactly the point. It is the kind of work that has a texture and a sound and a smell and a rhythm, and requires almost no thought, almost no narration. The kind of work that gives the hands something to do, so that the mind can drift and rest. The wax paper crackles softly. The chamomile releases its gentle, dry sweetness into the air each time a bundle is shifted. The lantern flame is steady and amber, and the fine sand on the bench surface makes a very slight sound under her wrists as she moves them, the softest of scraping sounds, almost not a sound at all. After a while, she pauses and reaches for the clay cup of chamomile water on the tray. The flowers in it have opened fully now, small white wheels floating on the surface of the water, which has gone a very faint amber gold from steeping. She lifts the cup and holds it for a moment without drinking, just warming her hands on it. Though the evening is not cold enough yet to need the warmth, there is a particular comfort in holding something warm, in having the heat of a cup move through your palms. Then she drinks, slowly, without hurry, 2 or 3 careful sips. The chamomile water tastes gentle and dry and faintly sweet, the way very quiet things taste, the way air tastes just before you fall asleep, the way a room tastes when it has been still for a while, and the dust has settled, and the light has gone low. She sets the cup down. She picks up the needle again. There is a torn section of quilted panel that has been waiting on the bench since before you arrived. She brought it in from the yard sometime in the afternoon. A section that had developed a longer tear than she could repair in place, that needed to be removed entirely from the hive box and brought to the bench where the light is better and the work can be done with full attention. She spreads it across the bench now, over the wax paper pressings, weighting the corners with the same smooth stones. The panel is perhaps the size of a large book when unfolded. 2 layers of linen, with a middle layer of something thicker and woollier between them. The whole thing stitched together in long parallel rows, the width of a thumb apart. The stitching slightly irregular in the way of things made by hand over many sittings, each sitting adding its own small variation. tear runs diagonally across one corner, perhaps the length of her hand, and the linen at its edges has frayed slightly, the individual threads loosening from the weave and softening into a faint fuzz. She trims the frayed edges first with a small pair of scissors, working slowly, cutting only what needs to go, preserving as much of the original fabric as can be preserved. The sound of the scissors is very quiet. A thin whisper of blades through linen, a sound so soft it is almost indistinguishable from the other soft sounds of the yard. Then she takes a small square of new linen from a fold of cloth at the back of the bench, fabric held in reserve for exactly this purpose, cut to various sizes and kept ready, because things always need mending, and it is better to have the materials of mending close at hand than to have to search for them in the middle of the work. She holds the patch over the tear, checking the grain of the fabric against the grain of the panel, making small adjustments until they align. She pins the patch with 3 short bone pins, setting each pin with a slight pressure, the pin going through the patch and the panel with a nearly inaudible sound, a very faint whisper of something rigid passing through something soft. And then she threads her needle with a longer length of the cream-colored thread and begins the work of attaching the patch to the panel. The stitch is called a flat stitch, a running stitch close to the edge of the patch, made with a needle that is blunt enough not to split the thread of the linen, but pointed enough to find the gaps between the woven threads. The resistance is always the same: the slight drag of thread through dense fabric, the tension at the apex of each pull, the moment where you feel whether the thread has seated cleanly or needs to be adjusted. She feels all of this in her hand without thinking about it. The information comes in through her fingertips and is processed somewhere below the level of conscious thought, and her hands continue their rhythm, and the stitch runs along the edge of the patch in a quiet, even line. Pull. The thread draws through. Pause. The needle rests. The arc back through, a little further along. Pull. The thread draws through. Pause. The yard is very quiet now. The candles along the wall have burned lower, not significantly. Beeswax candles burn for a long time, and these are only a few hours into their evening, but enough that the light has very slightly shifted, become a degree warmer, a degree more orange in tone. The dunes beyond the wall have gone entirely dark on their faces, only the sky above them still light, a deep blue-gray with stars now, 2 or 3 of the brightest visible in the south, then more appearing as you look at them, as the sky continues to darken in its patient downward drift. The air over the wall has a distinct chill in its upper register now. The warmth at ground level persists. It will persist for hours yet, the sand holding the day's heat in its patient way. But the coolness is present and real, and it gives the enclosed yard a quality of shelter, of being held within warmth, while the dark and the cool wait outside. The quilted linen panels on the hive boxes do their work. The low wall does its work. The small beeswax flames do their work. The Patchwright stitches on. When she reaches the second side of the patch, she does not stop to assess or measure or compare. She simply turns the corner and continues, the rhythm unbroken, pull and pause and arc and pull, the needle making its small, almost inaudible progress through the linen and back. The thread makes a very faint sound, a sound between the softest creak and the softest whisper, only just audible over the hum of the hives, which continues its low, steady resonance. The resonance of sleeping bees, the resonance of an enclosed warmth, the resonance of a community at rest in a place made for it. She completes 3 sides of the patch. She snips the thread. She starts a new length for the 4th side, threading the needle with the easy practice of someone who has done this action 10,000 times, who no longer looks at the needle while threading it, but simply brings the thread and the eye together, and the thread goes through. Then, the 4th side, the same rhythm, pull and pause, the faint drag, the quiet sound of the thread drawing through the dense weave. When the 4th side is complete, she runs her thumb around the full perimeter of the patch, pressing the stitching flat, feeling for any place where the thread has bunched or puckered. She finds one small pucker near the first corner and smooths it out with a firm motion of her thumbnail. It releases easily, the linen accepting the correction without complaint. She removes the bone pins and sets them in the shallow clay dish beside the lantern. She holds the repaired panel up to the lantern light, turning it slowly. The patch is slightly different in shade from the surrounding linen, a little newer, a little whiter, and this does not trouble her at all. In time, the patch will weather to the same tone as everything around it, will acquire the same slight golden cast that comes from seasons of sun and use in proximity to warm wax, and the repair will become simply part of the panel's history, one more layer of its continuing life. For now, it is new, and it is holding, and it is good. She folds the panel along its original creases and sets it at the end of the bench to be hung back on the hive box in the morning. Then she sits very still for a moment, her hands in her lap, her eyes resting on the steady amber point of the lantern flame. The hum of the hives is all around her, very low, very steady. The hum of 10,000 small, warm lives at rest. The beeswax candles along the wall give off their gentle smell and their steady light. The chamomile in the air is quieter now that the herb bundles have been covered by their second sheet of wax paper, but still present, still the dry and patient undercurrent beneath everything. The smell that was here when you arrived and will be here when you leave. From beyond the wall, again, the sound of sand releasing from a dune crest. A long, quiet cascade, 5 seconds, 6 seconds, then settling into the silence that is always waiting on the other side of sound in this place. She listens to it without turning her head. She breathes. She moves to the brazier. It stands near the windbreak section of the wall, a low iron basin on 3 short legs set into a cleared circle of swept sand, currently holding a small bed of coals that have been burning since early afternoon and are now well past their first heat, glowing a deep and steady orange red at their lowest level, covered in a thin gray ash above. The brazier radiates warmth into the immediate air around it, a warmth that is visible in the slight shimmer above it and palpable when you stand near it. Not hot, not fierce, just the steady and patient warmth of coals that have agreed to burn slowly and for a long time. She takes a short-handled tool from beside the brazier, a flat paddle of iron, and stirs the coals very gently. Once, twice, 3 slow strokes that turn the ash and reveal the deep glow beneath. The coals move and settle with a sound like the softest possible shifting of small stones, a sound that is very close to the sound of sand moving on a dune face. Quiet, granular, settling into the silence it came out of without leaving much trace. She adds 2 small pieces of something. Not wood, exactly. Something denser and darker. A compressed fuel brick of some local material that burns long and even and cool, that gives off a faint smell of dry earth and something mineral when it first takes the heat, before it settles into its own clean burn. She places them at the edge of the coal bed, not in the middle, at the edge where the heat is steady, but not intense, where a new addition can take its time about joining the burn. She stands back and watches the coals for a moment. The new bricks take the heat slowly, their surfaces beginning to darken and then to glow at the edges, going from the dark density of cold material to the first suggestion of deep orange at the margins. She does not rush them. She simply watches, the paddle held loosely at her side, her face faintly illuminated by the deep orange-red glow. When she is satisfied, when the new bricks have committed to their slow burn and the brazier is feeding itself steadily, she carries the paddle back to its place and stands for a moment, looking out over the wall toward the dunes. The dune field is dark now, except for the stars. There are many of them, very many. The kind of sky that only happens far from any settlement with lights, far from anything that competes with the stars for the attention of the night. The dunes are visible only in silhouette, their long, ridged crests drawn in a faint silver black against the star-dense sky, their faces and hollows invisible, implied. The whole landscape is utterly still. No wind, no movement, only the sky overhead doing its slow, imperceptible turning, and the stars fixed in their patterns like stitching in a dark cloth, and the faint, ambient warmth of sand that has held the day's heat and is releasing it now, very gradually, very patiently, into the cooling night. She turns back to the yard. She goes to the candles along the wall, beginning at the south end and working her way north, stopping at each one to trim the wick if it needs it. A small pair of iron snippers, a quick clip, the tiny piece of carbonized wick falling to the clay dish, and to check the pool of warm wax forming in the dish around each candle's base. Some candles have good pools and clean flames, and need nothing. Some need a small adjustment of the wick, which she makes with a slender wooden tool, tilting the wick slightly, correcting the angle of the flame from a slight lean to a straight upright, watching the flame stabilize and steady itself after the correction. The smell of the candles is very close when she leans over them. The warm beeswax smell, rich and clear, slightly sweet, deeply familiar. The smell of this yard at every hour of its evening. The smell that is woven into everything here, the way the amber light is woven into everything here, not separate from the place, but part of its basic character. At one candle near the middle of the wall, the pool has overflowed very slightly, a small, thin run of warm wax down the side of the clay dish and onto the stone platform beneath. She waits for the run to stop. A few seconds, no more. Then takes a small implement from her pocket, a thin, flat piece of bone, and lifts the cooled overflow from the stone with a careful prying motion, not damaging the stone, not damaging the dish, just removing the small excess and setting it in a tin she carries for this purpose. Nothing is wasted here. All the overflow wax will be melted down and poured into new molds. She continues along the wall. The candles burn steady. The yard is warm and amber and smells of beeswax and chamomile and the mineral coolness of the desert night. The hives hum their low hum, which you have stopped hearing as a separate thing and started hearing as the ground note of the evening itself, the tone that everything else sounds against. When she finishes with the candles, she goes to the workbench and begins to prepare the wax for the molds. There is a small clay pot on a flat stone beside the brazier. She has moved it here without you noticing, in one of the intervals between your careful attention to other things, and in the pot is a small quantity of beeswax that has been warming slowly since she placed it near the coals. The wax is fully melted now, liquid amber, clear and slightly luminous, deeper in color than honey, carrying all of its warmth and none of its sweetness in the visible quality of the liquid. She lifts the pot from the stone with a folded cloth protecting her hand and carries it to the workbench. She sets it near the lantern, which provides both light and a small additional warmth, enough to keep the wax fluid while she works. The clay molds are arranged in a row, 5 of them, the round and oval shapes she has used many times, their interiors smooth from previous pourings, their bases warmed slightly so that the wax won't cool too fast against cold clay and pull away from the mold before it's had time to settle. She pours slowly. The wax comes out of the pot in a very thin, very controlled stream. She holds the pot by the folded cloth with one hand and steadies the pour with the other, tilting just enough to start the flow and then maintaining it. And the wax fills the first mold from the bottom up in a smooth, continuous rise. Amber liquid, going slowly amber pale at the edges as it touches the clay walls and begins to cool. She fills the mold to within a small distance of the rim, then steadies the pour and tips the pot back upright, and the thin stream stops cleanly. She moves to the second mold. The same slow pour, the same patient upward rise of liquid wax, the same slight sizzle, so quiet as to be barely audible, where the warm wax touches the cooler clay at the very base of the mold, a sound like the absolute quietest imaginable whisper of steam, gone in an instant. Third mold. Fourth. Fifth. Each pour is the same length, the same careful, controlled stream, the same amber rise. By the 5th mold, the pot is nearly empty. She tips it more steeply, letting the last of the wax come out with gravity's quiet encouragement, and the 5th mold fills almost to the rim. She sets the empty pot down on the folded cloth and stands back and looks at the 5 molds in a row, each one filled with warm liquid wax that is already beginning to cool at the edges, already showing the first faint crinkle of the surface skin forming. This is the part where nothing happens. The wax cools on its own, in its own time, and there is nothing to do but let it. And so she moves away from the bench and the cooling molds and goes to sit in the low-backed wooden chair that stands against the inside of the wall, near the brazier, but not so near as to be too warm, in a place where the ambient warmth of the coals and the ambient warmth of the sand and the small amber warmth of the nearest candle make a small, comfortable zone of settled temperature. She draws her patchwork blanket from the back of the chair. It has been resting there all evening, waiting. It is a large blanket, heavier than it looks, made of patches of various woven fabrics in muted colors, ochre and cream, and a dusty clay blue, and a warm gray, and a brown so deep it is almost black. all stitched together with the same cream thread she uses for the Hive panel repairs, the same patient flat stitch running along every seam. It is the Patchwright's own, made over many seasons, each patch added when a new fabric came available, from worn garments, from trade cloth, from the scraps of work done on other things, so that the blanket holds within it a kind of quiet history, a textile memory of many evenings and many materials and many careful stitches. She draws it across her lap and leans back in the chair. The hives hum. The candles burn. The brazier glows. The wax cools in the molds on the bench, going slowly from amber liquid to amber opaque, developing its pale, smooth surface, becoming, over the course of the next hour, a set of new small candles that will join the others along the wall and give their amber light to future evenings. She rests, not sleeping, not yet, just resting, which is its own thing, a settled and comfortable occupation of the present moment, a willingness to be exactly where you are without moving toward anything else. Her eyes are open, but soft, unfocused, resting on the nearer wall of the yard, where the candlelight moves very faintly against the pale stone and the pale patches of clay tile and the pale linen panels of the hive boxes. From somewhere out in the Dune field, very far, barely audible, there's the sound of a small desert wind moving across a dune crest. Not a loud wind, not a significant wind, just a brief local circulation of cooler air finding its way down from height, touching the sand at the crest, producing a very faint, dry whisper that lasts perhaps 3 seconds and then is gone. The yard continues its quiet. The patchwork blanket is warm, and its weight is comforting. The particular comfort of something with real substance, something that doesn't just rest on you, but settles onto you, that meets the slight coolness of the evening air with its own patient warmth and holds it. She reaches up after a while and turns down the wick of the nearest candle, the one in the clay dish on the stone platform beside her chair, just slightly, so its flame is smaller, so the pool of warm wax in the dish is a little quieter. The light in her immediate vicinity dims very slightly, though the yard as a whole is still amber lit, still warm. She closes her eyes, then opens them again, just to look once more at the yard, at the rows of hive boxes in their quilted linen wraps, at the candles along the wall, at the stars visible above the wall's coping, at the lantern on the workbench with its steady flame, at the wax cooling in the molds, going slowly, patiently still. She breathes in beeswax and chamomile and mineral desert air. She breathes out and draws the blanket a little higher. The night has its own quality now, a settled quality, the quality of an evening that has passed its middle and is beginning its long, slow descent toward its deepest hour. The candles have burned lower, several inches lower than when the evening began, their clay dishes warmed through, their flames perhaps very slightly smaller than at their brightest, though still steady, still amber. The brazier coals have settled into their deepest phase, the fuel bricks now fully committed to their slow burn, the orange-red glow constant and low. The hum of the hives has, if anything, deepened. This is the hour when the cluster condenses further, when the bees drawn together for warmth draw slightly more together, when the collective temperature at the center of the cluster rises by some fraction of a degree, and the resonance of the whole changes in a way that is imperceptible to most listeners, but that the Patchwright hears as a slight deepening, a slight broadening of the tone, a hum that has found its fullest frequency. It comes up through the ground. It comes up through the stone platforms and the packed sand and the flat pavers and the legs of the chair she rests in. It is in the air, and it is in the surfaces of things, and it is, after an evening of it, so much a part of the sensation of this place that it is no longer separable from the other sensations, no longer the hum of sleeping bees, but simply the quality of being here, in this yard, at this hour, wrapped in this blanket, breathing this air. You are sitting very still. You are breathing very slowly. The amber light is soft and even across everything, touching the tops of the hive boxes and the folds of the quilted panels and the rim of the brazier basin and the long, pale run of the yard's low wall and the fine sand between the pavers that catches the candlelight and holds it as a faint warmth. The wax paper pressings on the bench are doing their quiet work in the dark. The dried chamomile flowers flattening a little further. The gray-green herb settling into the paper in long, dry sprays. The faint, sweet, and mineral smell of them released very slowly into the air around the bench. The molds of new wax are fully cooled now. They sit in their row, small and pale and perfect, each one a smooth oval or round that will be turned from its mold in the morning and fitted with a wick and added to the supply of candles that lives in the low cedar-lined cabinet against the windbreak wall. The cedar smell comes from there, a faint warmth, a dry and golden smell under the beeswax and the chamomile, another layer in the deep, patient, unhurried smell of this place. She stirs, very slightly, in the chair. She adjusts the patchwork blanket, pulling one corner across her shoulder, smoothing a section of it with her palm. A brief and quiet gesture, habitual, done without thought. The patches of the blanket are warm to the touch, warmed by the evening and by her own warmth beneath them, and the variety of textures under her fingers, the smooth, close-woven patches beside the slightly rougher, the thin cloth beside the thick, is its own quiet interest, the tactile record of all the different cloth that has found its way into this blanket's continuing life. Her breathing is slow. In through the nose, beeswax and chamomile and cedar and cool mineral air. Out through the nose, slowly, the breath going out and the chest settling and the shoulders dropping another fraction. The yard holds its warmth. The hives hum. There's nothing more to do this evening. The repairs are made. The wax is poured. The herbs are pressed between their sheets of cool paper. The candles are trimmed and burning. The brazier is banked and feeding itself slowly, and will hold its coals through the night without attention. The hive boxes are wrapped and warm, and humming their deep and contented hum. The quilted linen panels doing their patient work in the cool desert night, holding the warmth of the colony inside and the chill of the open air outside. Everything that can be done has been done, gently, in the amber light, without urgency. And everything that cannot quite be finished, the seams that will eventually need another stitch, the candles that will eventually need replacing, the molds that will eventually need filling again, all of that will wait, with the patient and entirely unhurried quality of things that have always been waiting here and are in no particular hurry to stop. You are here in the chair, or very near the chair, your own breathing matched to hers, slow, even, deep, patchwork blanket is heavy and warm. The amber light is very soft now. The hum of the hives is the ground beneath every other sensation, the tone that everything else rests on, as steady as the earth underfoot, as patient as the dunes. You can feel the warmth of the day still held in the sand below. It comes up through the pavers, through the legs of the chair, through the soul of everything that rests on this ground, a warmth that is not the warmth of fire, but the warmth of stone that has been patient enough to absorb an entire day of sun and is now slowly, very slowly, giving it back to the night. The stars above the wall have multiplied. They are very bright, very steady. The particular brightness of stars seen through air that has no moisture in it. Each one a hard, clean point of light. Many of them, too many to count. The ones between the ones you're looking at revealed when you look slightly to one side, and then more between those, and more between those. The sky going on in all directions with great patience and enormous depth. You don't need to count them. You don't need to name them. You only need to let your eyes rest against them and let the sight of them come in and settle in, the way a deep breath settles, filling something, resting there, then gradually releasing. The candle nearest you shivers once, very slightly, as the air moves through the yard in one of its slow, unhurried circulations, warm from below and cool from above. The flame recovers. It burns straight and steady and amber clear, its pool of warm wax surrounding its base in a clean small circle, the smell of it rising steadily into the cool air. The Patchwright's breathing is very slow now. A breath in, long and quiet. A breath out, longer, quieter. The yard is silent, except for the hum. You are very still. Your hands are at rest. Your eyes are heavy, or closed already, perhaps. The amber light coming through your eyelids as a warm, dark glow, as a sense of brightness held at a comfortable distance, near enough to be comforting, and far enough to let you rest. The hum of the hives is very close now. Not loud, never loud. Just present. The low resonance of it moving through the air and through the ground, and through everything that rests on this ground in this amber-lit yard where nothing is ever quite finished and nothing ever needs to be. The smell of beeswax is warm and simple. The smell of chamomile is dry and soft. The air from the dunes is clean and cool and very faintly mineral. You breathe them all in slowly. You let them go slowly. There is no next thing. There is only this, the warmth of what surrounds you, the weight of the blanket, the steady amber light, the patient hum that goes on and on and on. The dunes are still. The stars are turning, very slowly, too slowly to see. The wax in the molds is fully cool and still. The coals in the brazier are deep orange red and low and steady and content. The quilted linen panels on the hive boxes sway once, very gently, in a breath of air, and settle, and are still. The night deepens. Everything is quiet. The candles burn lower. The hum continues, low, warm, even. The ground note of this place, the sound of 10,000 lives at rest, the sound of warmth held carefully through the cold hours. You are held carefully too. The blanket is warm. The air is soft. The yard is amber and quiet and smells of old honey and chamomile and cedar and cool desert stone. Your breathing is very slow. Each breath in is a little warmer than the air. Each breath out carries away a little of whatever was left to let go of. There is very little left. The dunes settle once more, far off, very far, a quiet sound, a long, soft pour of sand finding its rest. And then silence, the hum, and warmth, and the amber light through your eyelids, and the weight of the blanket, and the smell of beeswax, warm and still, and the hum, just the hum, warm and low and even, carrying you, slow and still and warm. The dunes hold their warmth through the long night. The hives breathe in the dark, and everything that needs mending will be mended slowly in the morning. In the morning. Rest now. Rest.